every budget increasing rates far beyond inflation. So they're increasing rates every year, and now they can't do that anymore. So they found a trick, a way around that, by trying to introduce on top of rates a separate tax. But what this amounts to, and this was published in the Herald Sun today, and it's probably the first time in my life that I've appreciated a story printed in the Herald Sun, what they said and what they made clear is that even if you choose the small bin, the smallest bin, the smallest option at $164 a year, that amounts to an 8% rate increase. In the draft budget that will be voted on in a few weeks, a majority of the councillors voted for it. All the Greens councillors voted for it, and the Labor councillors voted for it. The only opposition to it was Socialist councillor Stephen Jolly, Independent councillor Damien, and Independent councillor Jackie Fritzstacke, who voted against the draft budget, not specifically because of the bin tax actually, but because of another issue with the budget that I actually agree with her on. But so she voted against the draft budget on that basis. Now, because of all this opposition, this week, one of the Greens councillors came to us and said, I actually don't support the bin tax anymore, which is good, which is a good step. But hopefully she goes and talks to her colleagues that are still actively promoting this dramatic rate increase. The Labor councillors who initially voted for the bin tax to be included in the draft budget, got a call from their state member, the state member for Richmond, the Labor Party member for Richmond, Dick Wynne, who said to them, "Are you serious? Are you kidding me? This is terrible," because he knows that there's so much community anger against the bin tax that anger could carry on to the state election next year, and he's at risk of losing his seat. So these same two Labor councillors that voted for the bin tax to be included in the draft budget have now, this week, been going around door-knocking Richmond for Richard Wynne's re-election campaign, saying they're opposed to the bin tax. But even if they do pass a motion to draft up another budget that doesn't include the bin tax, that doesn't mean they're going to vote for that. So we have to keep the pressure up.
Yarra does not have a revenue problem. Yarra has an overhead problem, where the money is going to comparable councils. So I've looked at Stonington, Port Phillip and Boroondara. Of those councils in this budget, Yarra, if the waste charges goes through, will be the highest charging council per capital improved value. So that's land value. That's sort of how they work out how much rates that they should charge. Also per resident. And with the exception of Boroondara, which has much bigger blocks and bigger families, also per residence. We're the highest on all those factors. So there's heaps of revenue coming in compared to other councils, which by and large all pretty much do the same thing. Sure, there's differences, but fundamentally they look after community, provide community services, they deal with planning and development, and they look after infrastructure like roads and parks and drains and all those sorts of things. That is 90% of what councils do. They all do the same, so they're very comparable. Yarra gets more revenue than those other councils. The problem we've got, and it's not a problem with the services that were being delivered, and it's not about the services, Yarra has, compared to those other councils, a massive amount of what's corporate overhead. Corporate executives, people running around, all basically inward focused on the Yarra business rather than outward focused on the services that they're wanting. And the trouble is, this executive, which includes all the spin doctors, and I think there's lots and lots of spin doctors amongst that, the real problem is that we're spending, the council's most estimate is that we're spending about somewhere between $5 to $10 million per year just on corporate fat. You know, and the capital budget, we've got the slowest capital budget of the comparable councils, and a lot of that just goes on, you know, mobile phones, tablets, you know, passenger cars. One thing I can't work out is why we're spending $700,000 a year on passenger cars. It's like 30 new cars every year. Really, the focus needs to be how can we turn Yarra Council into being more service focused and less internally focused, because that's where the real problem is.
So this idea that this tax is needed to keep the budget afloat is absolutely not true. And on that question of where is the money going, well, over the last few years, the council spent tens of millions of dollars to buy new corporate offices for themselves. We've got 3 of the most beautiful town halls in Melbourne, And half of them are empty now. Fitzroy Town Hall is half empty now because they wanted to waste our ratepayers' money on these new offices. They spent $200,000 on new office furniture alone. This is what they're spending money on, let alone the corporate management. That's double most other comparable councils. This is where the money is going. And what we're saying is, and they're trying to blackmail us by saying, if you don't agree to this bin tax, we'll cut frontline staff. And that's absolutely not necessary. And we contacted the council officers, and the council officers said, if the bin tax isn't included in this budget, there's no need to cut any services. All services are funded by the budget, regardless of whether the bin tax is included or not. So it's absolute lies, and don't buy into it.
What this bin tax has done is to get people to focus more on what's actually happening within the council. And the previous speaker, I think, nailed it. I've done a similar analysis he's done, except I've gone back 10 years. And the figures are staggering. If we could just take employee costs, they have gone from 36% of the budget back in 2007 to 46%. Overall, 130% increase in staff costs. But when you analyse where the staff increases have occurred, it's all in the corporate area. To be very specific, and these figures have been signed off by a CPA, the corporate area has increased its staffing over 10 years by 320%. Service delivery staff have barely matched population growth. So there is it reinforces the points that have been previously made. This council is bloated. There is no argument. If the council corporate services area had maintained a reasonable constraint on staff growth over the last 10 years, the saving to this year's budget or next year's budget would be $18 million. So it gives you some idea of what the hell has been going on in that building in recent periods.
We heard this afternoon on 3AW from Tom Elliott, and also on the Channel 9 News Tonight, that we've won on the bin tax. I have to say to you, they've based that information on the fact that a resolution was passed at last night's council meeting unanimously that an alternative budget be prepared without the bin tax. That shows we've got them on the run, but it does not show we've won yet. As Mel said before, until it's signed on the dotted line, we haven't won this. The final vote is in June, and until we see this bin tax being put in the bin where it deserves to be, we haven't won it yet. So we have to keep the pressure on. Because those people who voted last night unanimously, or at least some of those people who voted last night unanimously to prepare an alternative budget, have been lock, stock and barrel behind the question of the bin tax. And to be fair, they haven't hidden that. They've been on the public record with video clips, with quotes in the paper, and, you know, they're entitled to their point of view. We had the extraordinary quotes in this morning's Herald Sun from my colleague, very nice bloke, but on this issue I have to disagree with him, Green councillor Mike McAvoy, who said when you boil it down, it's less than a cafe latte or a coffee on a weekly basis. I think that maybe that councillor's been influenced a little bit by the avocado comments by Tim Gurner on Sunday night. But he also made the more serious point that we need to take up, because it's a very, very serious point, that if we don't bring in the bin tax, we have to then say, what services do we want cut? And I think that when we look at that, we need to deconstruct that, because if that's true, that puts a whole new light on it. Our argument is that it's not true. In the next 12 months, according to the draft budget, we're expecting 11% increase in rate revenue into the council coffers, despite the rate cap, because of all the new apartments that are being built. More and more people paying rates that, even though the rates are only at 2% odd, there will still be an 11% income in rate revenue into this town hall. And that is why they have chosen, and that is why they are able to borrow money in the last few years to build, to buy, I should say, an unnecessary fourth office right here in the corner of Gladell Street and Bridge Road, when Fitzroy Town Hall lies idle. That is why 10 years ago we had 19 people working for this council on 120k or more a year, and now we've got 49 people working for this council on 129k or more a year. That is also why this council have chosen to spend in this year's draft budget, as was pointed out to me by Danae Bosler, who's here tonight, and she's correct, $200,000 on new furniture for the council. So this is something that they've chosen to do. And this council that have got this increase in revenue have also made the situation where they have slashed the funding to local area traffic management schemes. Those plans to make our streets safer as more and more people rat run through Yarra have been thrown out the window. They have chosen to put under threat the aftercare program at the Fitzroy Public Housing Estate, and they have chosen to bring in this bin tax. It is not a question of necessity, it's a question of political choice, that they put the people last. And we have to say to those councillors, if you agree with the bin tax, you have to realise that no matter how many votes that you got back in last October, you are now in a tiny minority. And I would say to those councillors, you need to resign. You're no longer got the confidence. And stand again for re-election against people who are opposed to the bin tax, and let the public decide. Because this isn't just a simple mistake. This is organic, a massive organic mistake that they've made. So keep the pressure on. We haven't won yet. We won't know until June whether or not we've won. We've got them on the run, but we haven't won yet. Thanks for coming. Keep the pressure on. I'll see you up inside.
I've got my, that's 6 days rubbish. That's 83% of my weekly rubbish. And I really don't need the service. Not all of it anyhow. That's all we contribute a week. And I don't think we should get the situation where rubbish is not collected and we've got a de facto tax.
I'm a local resident of Fitzroy, and when this bin tax happened, I was completely appalled that it was an extra tax on top of the council charges, the rates charges. And the reason I believe that was behind that was because the state government did a rate cap of 2.5%, and the City of Yarra, not all of the councillors in there, agreed that we should get around that legally and sting the residents. And I think that's appalling. As a community council, if you offer this sort of nonsense to the people who voted you in, then the ones who are with it need to be sacked. Upon doing some research, the council are intending to increase rates next year by 11%, based on property values that keep on going up and up and up. Flats keep on getting built, and the council have become greedy and realise that they want to have greed capitalism on this whole community, which isn't going to work. There's people that are really pressed. They can't afford any more debt. They just don't want to have another bill. And for a council to do it is just extreme greed capitalism. And I've never seen it before happen in Melbourne. But it's consistent bullying of a council. Absolutely, it's just, totally undemocratic. And I call it now the City of Yarra Bank.
Steve, you're one of the three councillors who are opposing the bin tax, the bin levy. How do you propose that the council increases its funds, because it's actually got a cap on in terms of it's not allowed to anymore?
Well, despite the fact that it's a 2% rate cap, they're actually going to be making more money in rate revenue in the next 12 months than anyone expected, because we're in the middle of a property boom, we're in the middle of a construction boom, and if you look around Yarra, Richmond, Fitzroy, Collingwood and all the rest of it, there's cranes everywhere. There's new apartments being built, so therefore there's more people paying rates. And in the next draft budget, the council is expecting an 11% increase in rate revenue. So they've got the money to spend, but they've chosen to spend it on things like new offices, on necessary offices for themselves. They've chosen to spend it on extra corporate management compared to other local councils. They've even chosen to spend $200,000 on new furniture for themselves. When you walk in there tonight to the council meeting, if you see a dodgy chair or a table, I'll give you $1 for every one you see. You're not going to see any, and yet they want to spend $200K on that. At the same time as they're doing that, they're slashing and burning on the ground floor. They're taking away from the poorest kids in Fitzroy the aftercare program. They're cutting the local area traffic management schemes, which protect our streets from rat runners and make our streets safer. And they're bringing in this regressive bin tax, because in the old days, People on the left support a progressive taxation system. The rich people paid more than the poor people. This bin tax is regressive. If you're a little old lady, a widower, living in a house, a little cottage in Richmond, you're going to pay exactly the same amount as a multi-millionaire living in a large mansion on Richmond Hill or whatever. So, it's just wrong. The public have spoken. There's been an absolute backlash against this. And yes, you're right, 3 originally voted against, but my information now is that at least 6 councillors who are against the bin tax, they've jumped ship, and I'm very, very confident in June if we keep the pressure on, we're going to win.
We've got the 4 Greens councillors are in favour of the bin tax, and one Greens councillor today in the paper said if the bin tax doesn't go ahead, then, I know what you just said, but they're saying that arts and other funding the council usually does will be cut. What's your response to that?
Well, it's nonsense. They're choosing to have austerity against programs that impact on some of the poorest people in this area. They're choosing to bring in this bin tax, cut the aftercare program, the Fitzroy estate, cut, as I said before, protection and improvement of our streets to make them safer, while at the same time they're spending money on brand new furniture for themselves, brand new offices for themselves, 49 people over 120k a year compared to in the past, like only a few years ago, 19 over 120k a year. So this is a political choice that they're making to spend money on the elite and not on the poor. So we're not talking about the Greek economy here. We're not talking about the Icelandic economy here. We're not talking about a council that's got no money. We're talking about a council, and I'll repeat my point, that's getting an 11% increase in rate revenue, which is a major source of income, over the next 12 months. So with that in mind, how can people who claim to be on the left, like the Greens, support it? It's a mistake. One of the Greens have now jumped ship and joined with us. So is the 2 ALP councillors, and the 2 independents always opposed it, plus me. So it looks like we're going to have 6 of the 9 against the bin tax. But the real driving force of this change hasn't been people like me. It's been the people on the street, through this massive people power movement of submissions, of emails, of phone calls, of texts, of hassling the councillors to say this is not good enough. And I think those councillors who support the bin tax after listening to what the public have spoken don't have the confidence of the public anymore. They should resign and force by-election.